Official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, June 24th, and I'm taking your questions live on social media, on Twitter, on YouTube, and all that good stuff. So just go ahead and jump in, and we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a nice little group of topics that we're covering this week. I thought since we had a couple of contracts come in, we would focus on a little bit on Kyle Pitts, talk about his new contract and congratulate him on that, and talk about what that means for him moving forward and expectations for him this year. Because if you've caught any of my previous videos, I've talked a little bit about it. I do have high expectations for Kyle Pitts this year, so we'll get into that. We will talk about Brenton Strange really quickly because I don't know how deeply Brenton Strange needs evaluation, but his extension is important in his fantasy outlook as well. Then we'll do some more news. We got stuff like seeing George Kittle running around at tight end university. So that is very interesting. And then I also wanted to talk about a few other things I did not get to talk about last week. De'Von Achane and his expectations for 2026 and the Denver Broncos backfield. I don't like to talk about the Broncos. You guys know that, but I've had some comments, a couple of comments on J.K. Dobbins. And then I was doing a show yesterday. You can find that show on Fantasy Pros. And the person who I was doing the show with was going to bat for RJ Harvey and made some good arguments. So I thought maybe we'll relook at my position, see if I can adjust that a little bit, or if I am doing the right thing in terms of fading it into oblivion. So we'll talk about that a little bit there as well. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's cover some of the quick news here real quick. No draft for Brendan Sorsby. Sorry, buddy. I haven't talked about that a lot just because it has zero relevance for redraft. And then from a dynasty perspective, it wasn't relevant until like a little bit ago. And then everyone prepared for it. And now it's a big nothing burger. I do think it's kind of deserved there. I low-key, I'm sorry to him, but I think that was the right decision in terms of not doing that supplemental draft for him, buddy, because you made quite a mistake there. And I don't know if there's any major issue with the NFL not doing it. Obviously, it's their choice. They don't have to do a supplemental draft, right? And I would not be surprised if the interest was extremely low on NFL teams. I know, media gets a little high stuff and, we'll talk about, no, there could be a fairly high pick invested into it. I mean, that's a high risk for a guy who could get popped again for gambling, since obviously he likes to do it, and then face a significant suspension or more from that. So no, I'm not shocked. I think there was probably some apprehension of people, wanting to take that level of risk, right? And then we had another cop investigation, guys. It's not stopping. Jesus. This time it was Geno Smith accused of battery, investigated by the cops. There was video. Nothing happened on the video, but obviously, they'll investigate it if it needs to be anything. Not a major deal from a fantasy perspective from us, because one, again, this is somebody who has not had any issues, so more than likely this would not be something that would impact the fantasy season anyway. We kind of talked about that last week with Josh Jacobs. And then when it comes to him in terms of, no one's drafting him. I mean, even in Superflex, we're not really making an investment there. And the only, players that we feel super comfortable with anyway would be Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. So from that extent, I mean, it's not a massive ordeal or anything for us to be significantly concerned about. So nothing too much in terms of massive news there that's going to affect us. So let's go ahead and dive into the Kyle Pitts contract. Actually, you know what? Got a question here in the chat from Henry Odom. 9682 says, "Hey Tara, what round are you comfortable taking Jeremiah Love in? Do you view him as RB1 or 2 in redraft?" Yeah, that is a good question right there. Let me look at where I have him overall here. Love. I have Jeremiah Love overall 37. So, which is, overalls are kind of flexible. So I think like where I would feel comfortable is into the third round, kind of as a high point there, ideally fourth round. And again, that kind of just depends on how your league is flowing in terms of whether or not he would drop a little bit further back there. But he's right outside an RB1 for me. I just feel a lot more comfortable with other guys. Obviously, we know the big top ones, but before him, I would draft who I have directly ahead of him is Josh Jacobs. I do rank Josh Jacobs. I think I talked about that. No, I didn't talk about that on this show. I talked about it in my rankings video. I'm ranking Jacobs as if he is starting the year and playing, right? So Jacobs is my RB13, so he would be right before Jeremiah Love. I would take Derrick Henry before Jeremiah Love, Kenneth Walker, or Martin Hampton, Chase Brown, and so on, and all the other obvious ones there. But yeah, more comfortable as an RB2. I don't think that I would want to. I would draft him as an RB2 if I was leaning robust RB and I was taking someone very reliable up top, and then I'm saying, hey, I just want to push. I'm comfortable with pushing receiver back a little bit more. I think I really like some of those, low end ish wide receiver twos like a Mecca Ibuka and whatnot. Maybe a Zay Flowers, a Lad McConkey if you want to, right? And heading robust RB, right? That's kind of the position I would take. I just wouldn't want Jeremiah Love to be the RB1 of my team, just because, again, similar situation to Ash and Genty last season, not as destitute, right? Because the Cardinals line is not great, but it's not tragic is the best way to put it, in the way that the Raiders offensive line was tragic last year, like just a complete mess, right? So from that perspective, it's not that bad with Jeremiah Love, but still same kind of deal, right? In terms of not a fantastic team. Unfortunately, we're relying on them to move the ball well, which I think that Jacoby Brissett can do, but there's the risk of what happens if they, start to lose and they want to try out Carson Beck midseason. Is the rookie going to feel comfortable with, exiting the pocket, checking down? Is he going to be able to make those competent choices, right? Or is he going to rely on his legs and try and get outside the pocket? And that just put Jeremiah Love into a situation where he's not getting the receptions that he needs, right? So that's the only risk there. I trust Jacoby Brissett, but if and when they do, because I think it's going to have to happen at some point, that's the only problem that I have, is that if I could get a full year guaranteed of Jacoby Brissett, I have zero problem with any of the Arizona Cardinals. Their schedule is atrocious. They will be playing from behind. Brissett will have to throw the ball 40 plus times, right? And he has zero problem doing that. But if Carson Beck comes in, that just inserts an anomaly that makes things a little bit uncomfortable for us, because we won't know what his tendencies in the NFL will be. And he does have to play theoretically at some point, because we know that the Cardinals aren't going to win games, unfortunately. So, and we know that they're going to have a high pick. We know that there's a lot of quarterbacks that will be on the board as potential draft picks for them, very talented quarterbacks next year. So they're going to have to evaluate and say, hey, do we have something here with Carson Beck? Is he, was he a diamond, not even diamond in a rough, right? Because it's not like he's an unknown, but would he be able to exceed expectations and be a franchise quarterback for us? And we use our high draft capital to invest in other positions of need? Or do we take that pick and we draft our franchise quarterback, right? So they got to see Carson Beck on the field and be able to do that. So we do have to see Carson Beck at some point. I almost would guarantee we see Carson Beck at some point, unfortunately. So, yeah, I can't lead off my team with Jeremiah Love for that risk purely, but as an RB2 is perfectly fine there. Excuse me, like slightly under the weather there. And then Loving Life says, what are your thoughts? Ooh, good question. What are your thoughts on about the RB situation in Seattle? Could Helani be a sleeper? See, it's weird because I would have thought, now granted, again, so the words out of training camp are that Helani has the inside track in terms of being a leg up on Emmanuel Wilson, right? Now, not training camp, but OTAs, right? OTAs and mini camp. So I caution us to take that 100% to heart, because it would be a little bit of an odd pairing with Jadarian Price in term. That could work, right? Because Jadarian Price has zero problem, obviously, being an early down back, right? just because he's not like, for me physically, if I'm looking at the Seattle backfield in terms of how it operated last year, for me, he was the Kenneth Walker replacement, right? So if they were going to move forward with that, now they don't have to because that offensive coordinator is now gone. But if they were going to move forward with that vision because it worked out so well, the only issue there would be is that, George Holani doesn't really play the Kenneth Walker role. So if Jadarian Price would be playing the Zach Charbonnet, short yardage, early down kind of stuff. He could be a sleeper in theory, but I don't think he has any value on the ground. So I just don't see how it can be a split in terms of like it was last year with Charbonnet and Walker. If that were to happen and Holani were to be the one with the inside track to play with Jadarian Price, I think we would be in a scenario where Jadarian Price is getting the vast majority of the workload and they just kind of conceptually flip. And he is getting, 15 to 18 carries a game, and Holani's work is just purely on third downs and a couple of checkdowns here and there, because that's kind of what happened in the playoffs, right? When we had Zach Charbonnet go down, Kenneth Walker just straight up took over, and Holani's usage was just a little bit of relief, right? It was the Kenneth Walker show. Holani was in there on third downs and not 100% on third downs, right? So I hesitate to say that if Holani does have that leg up, again, let me wrap it up here. I hesitate to say that if Holani does in fact have that leg up, that he would have anywhere near the kind of workload that either Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker had. I don't think he would be a sleeper as much as that would mean that we are in like massive wheels up scenario with Jadarian Price. So I can't do it just because I don't think it would have fantasy relevancy for us, because he would not be getting any touchdowns, no goal line work whatsoever based off what we've seen, unless he were to make a massive change in his profile and how the Seahawks use him. And he's been with them for multiple years now, and they know how they like him. I just don't see it happening. So no, that would only, if he, again, comes into relevancy, that would to me mean that we need to invest heavy in Jadarian Price there. So but again, take OTAs with a grain of salt. It doesn't always translate to exactly how the rules will be. It's entirely possible that what happens here is that they're using him a lot because they're trying to determine if they're going to keep him on roster. Because if Charbonnet does, in fact, make it back early in the season and he's ready for week 1, they're not going to carry 4 backs on active roster, right? So they have to be deciding between Holani and Emmanuel Wilson. So logically, if Holani is the one that's maybe on the bubble, he would get more work to see like, hey, let's give it one more shot. So honestly, I'm not taking too much stock into it. It means maybe that we need to keep our eyes on seeing if Zach Charbonnet actually is going to be ready a lot earlier than we thought maybe. Henry Odom says, what are the receivers that you would take over Bowers in round 2, in the second round there? Good question there. I'm going to look to my rankings here. The receivers that I would take over Bowers, right? And I have Bowers end of round 2. So there's a good bit that we can work with here, right? So it would be Nico if he slips, right, to the second round. I would take Nico. Even though we do have, again, I like the CJ Stroud offensive line consistency issue is a problem. We did have news that Tank Dell might be able to make it back this season. Now, to what capacity he would be able to make it back, they would probably be very careful and slow roll, but that'll be interesting and something that we can pay attention to. Sounds like he could participate in training camp, so that's awesome. I have a Tank Dell Dynasty share that would be lovely to actually be able to utilize or have some kind of glimmer of hope for the future there. But aside from that, even we saw Tank with Nico before, right, working in tandem way back when there was Stephon Diggs there. God, what a time. It's been a while. But even then, so, right, the wide receiver 2s and 3s aren't really competing with Nico. So he's very safe, even though we do have inconsistency with Stroud. So Nico is who I would take. I would still take Drake London. I would feel still comfortable with that, even though we've got the shaky quarterback situation, just based on the stupid level of upside that he has shown in himself and his talent there. George Pickens for sure. George Pickens for sure, I'd feel good about. AJ Brown, 100%. Chris Olave, I would. I think that's where I start to look and get a little bit like, would I take Chris Olave or Brock Bowers? That one is a little bit on the edge for me. So maybe we stop it right there and we say up to AJ Brown is where I would feel really good, right? And say like, hey, I'm taking AJ Brown. I trust him and the volume and the connection that he'll have with Drake May. And then after that is where I'd feel comfortable pivoting to Brock Bowers. Yeah, I think that's the best way to approach it. It's real close neck and neck there with him and Chris Olave. The next receiver after that would be Rashee Rice. And I know for sure that I would take Bowers over Rashee Rice in a vacuum, right? Just because of, obviously, the vast majority of legal potential issues there with him. So, yeah, that's the cutoff. And then there's, Malik Neighbors after that. That's the injury. So, yeah, I would take Bowers over Neighbors too, and then Devontae Smith and T. Higgins, right? So that's a good range there. Those are the wide receivers. I would cut it off at A.J. Brown is the one that I would feel comfortable with. From Turd Ferguson, who are some of the late RBs you would take? I may get tunnel vision if I see wide receivers early, and I may forget a top running back. So yeah, let's see how late we want to go here. I was actually looking at late receivers. So I was looking at late running backs because I'm doing a late round lottery ticket video either Friday or Monday. And I was looking like once you get past, and my plan was heading into like crafting that video, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this late, like legit late, right? And I'm going to look at overall ADP 150 and above, right? And the problem is that from like that gets a little shaky, right? Unfortunately, particularly at running back, because there's really not anyone that you can look to. Like I was looking for running backs to put in the video, and basically the only one that I could come up with that really had value that late was Marshawn Lloyd, right? Because it does appear that, again, we know at this point with Emmanuel Wilson gone, the direct handcuff for Josh Jacobs, even if nothing comes of his legal issue, still like one person, like getting a direct handcuff RB1, right? The backup to that RB1, who is a high volume guy, who gets an ample amount of goal line touches, right? When Josh Jacobs is healthy, you were getting touchdown every single week. It was the easiest anytime bet before he got hurt, right? So Marshawn Lloyd going that late, because of obviously the injury risk to him and the fact that he has never made it through a season, that's a great discount right there. So that's one that I would get, especially because we did see even, earlier on, there was a little bit of Green Bay they use a pretty strong workload for Josh Jacobs for sure, but not insanely aggressive to the point where they don't have supplemental work there. So Lloyd could see the field a little bit, especially because they'll want to actually get him out on the field since he's been so limited in that capacity. So that's one if we're talking super late. But again, the super late ones are not really clicking for me, right? So moving up to some guys where if you miss out and you're thinking, okay, I need to, maybe you went hero RB, but pushed your second running back super late. Maybe you went zero RB, but you're not feeling super comfortable about the guys that you leaned into. I think there's a very interesting pocket of players that you can still get at good value. I've talked about Jonathan Brooks before as someone who, no offense to Chuba Hubbard, right? I'm not coming for you, buddy. Like you've been very reliable as a running back. But the Panthers have snatched your job away before. The Panthers love snatching jobs. They don't have loyalty, period. And I respect that about them. I like that they are real quick to snatch a job if someone else is doing better. That's cool. Not for the players, but it's cool from a fantasy perspective because it's fun to have new players involved with high upside, right? So with that said, again, they've talked specifically about getting Jonathan Brooks on the field. We know that Jonathan Brooks would be playing above Trevor Etienne. So all Jonathan Brooks has to do is outperform Chuba Hubbard, and they will feel very good about giving him an increased workload there. And we know that he is 3-down back, very capable. Receiving upside is not a problem. So that's one that is very interesting for me because if he stays healthy, week 1, I can easily see where we would get 10 touches from him right off the bat, right? Again, I do still like the potential of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. We still got to feel how things are working out. Obviously, again, when you look at this with him, you have to just be aware that Rachaad White has a permanent role in there. Now, we have heard that JCM is working on his receiving and blocking because he knows that that is a sticking point that keeps him from being able to be a 3-down back, right? So possible, right? And he's very young. There's not to say that you can't develop that skill set, right? We've seen plenty of running backs who did not have that profile develop that skill set in terms of being a competent receiver. So it's possible that he could, but more than likely, Rachaad White is very good at that. He's going to have a role. But at the end of the day, we just need to make sure that he's getting the early down stuff. And I feel good just from a pure volume perspective and his ability to break off like super long runs as well. And then the offense being better with Jaden Daniels back as well. So expecting a bounce back there. So that's one that I'm interested in. Obviously, Kenneth Gainwell is one that I do love there. And I know that people have their skepticism in terms of that workload from Pittsburgh transferring over. And that is your right to have that skepticism, right? Because Baker Mayfield is very check down friendly, right? But Aaron Rodgers checked down at the dumbest amount. Like, it was ridiculous last season. And it's not because of anything weird with him. It's because he didn't trust the receivers outside of DK Metcalf. That meant that his more reliable receiving options were, in fact, Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell, right? He's an excellent receiver. He's a former receiver, right? So while the egregious receptions he had last year won't transfer over, he is definitely playing a 1B situation in this backfield here. And yes, Bucky can catch, right? Which also kind of means, and Tampa Bay actually came out and said that they're very similar backs, which could mean that you don't take it as a role that is one's early down and one's third down. If you can both do very similar skill sets, they might just go hot hand, change of pace, like can flip between one or the other, which is always fun from a coaching perspective because it makes the offense not super predictable. If you know that, when Kenneth Gainwell comes in, they're going to be throwing to him or they're going to be throwing the ball. He's blocking, right? So Kenneth Gainwell, I think, will have a pretty good involvement in the offense right off the bat. So that's one, especially in full PPR leagues, that like right off the bat, 100%, because we know Baker Mayfield likes to check down. And then I will say this as well. From a 0 RB perspective, and I'm not a fan of it because I do this year in particular, because I do lean at the very least hero RB, just because there's that weird kind of zone where things get a little bit shaky, right? But if you are doing 0 RB, I think a very interesting approach is looking at the backfields that are tandem backfields that we know of that are very run heavy and good offenses. And two of those guys for me that stick out are Blake Corum and Kyle Monangai, especially Blake Corum, because again, if everything repeats as it was last season, and I know that people will say, the offense operated at such a high level, it's got to regress a little bit. Not necessarily, right? It's not going to regress just for any reason, right? Any random reason of, it's just naturally got to come down. No, it would come down if we had some, an offensive line injury, right? If we had multiple offensive line injuries, if we had an injury to Matt Stafford, right? An injury to Puka Nacua, right? So the offense coming down would just be the result of injury. So if all things stay equal and they stay nice and healthy, and we know that they can make it and perform at a high level, even if Devontae Adams were to get injured again, right? There's going to be goal line opportunities on top of goal line opportunities. And I was talking about this in another video. The thing about it is that Corum was in that like 7 to 14 carry range in the back half of the season. And not all of it was garbage time. I went through and looked at the game logs because sometimes I have nothing to do, right? Just to verify, just to be sure that it wasn't always garbage time production. And it was not, right? If the offense repeats at that level, 7 to 14 carries is all you need to get to about in that with the way that the running backs are able to be so incredibly efficient, right? And average easily over 5 yards per carry, because the defenses can't focus on stopping the run. It just means that they have to face less in the box, cleaner paths, right? And the offensive line is good. So they're averaging well over 5 yards per carry. I mean, basic math, yeah. Blake Corum can be fantasy relevant as an RB2, even alongside Blake Corum, right? Similar deal with Kyle Monangai, and we kind of saw it last year. Now, he is more touchdown dependent. It does tilt a little bit more because Chicago's offense is not as prolific as obviously the Rams, but they still do run a lot. They're a very balanced attack. They're actually like slightly run heavier than they are in terms of the pass there. So that's another one that's very interesting. So those are kind of the running backs that you can wait on a little bit and realistically put in your starting lineup right off the bat there for sure. Then Turd Ferguson says, the follow-up comment to that was, personally okay with letting people get RBs and then getting some good pass catchers, but I don't know if I'll regret that again like last year. Yeah, last year was pretty sticky on robust RB being the way. I don't know if it's necessary this year, but at the very least, my preference is hero RB. But I will say this. I think, obviously, if you have the ability to get Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, or even Jonathan Taylor, but really specifically the first two there is really the sticking point. If you have the ability to get those, you don't pass them up. But after that, technically speaking, while I like all of those first round running backs, with the exception of Christian McCaffrey, that scares me a lot, right, in terms of his injury risk for this year, I kind of like leaning towards getting one of the higher end, more reliable pass catchers, right? Walking away with, at the very least, an Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then turning around and grabbing your running back in the second round, because those higher end wide receivers are so much more reliable than the guys being drafted after them. Like if I'm looking at, like, let's look at it right now. I should look at rankings, consensus rankings, not my own rankings, just so you guys can get a better idea of ADP. So if I'm looking at it right now, right, and actually let me look at overall wide. Okay, that's much better. So if I'm looking at it right now, we know that it's, Jamar, Puka, JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Those are widely considered your tier one guys that are very safe, very comfortable. Amon-Ra doesn't get the respect that I think he deserves in terms of, he doesn't have the ceiling of a Puka Nacua, right? But he has reliably finished as like wide receiver 3 overall, back to back to back. The man is a machine in terms of putting out the exact production that you expect out of him, regardless of the situation, because Detroit's offense took a wee bit of a hit last year, in my opinion, right? There were some not so wonderful times, unfortunately, there. So he's very reliable. I consider him right there in that like comfortable tier for me, right? After that, things get very shaky with saying like, okay, do I trust CeeDee Lamb to have a bounce back? He was playing, he dealt with injury last season. But do I trust him to have top 5 upside with George Pickens out there playing? I don't know if I can say that. I personally can't say that. I don't feel comfortable with it, right? Justin Jefferson. How much are we trusting Kyler Murray, right? What happens if Kyler gets hurt and we're forced to watch JJ McCarthy with him again, right? And then you get to Drake London, quarterback issue, right? We talked about all the others that come after that. So I'm actually more comfortable investing in one of those top receivers and then turning around in the second round or even third round, really, and grabbing, because in the second round, you can grab Saquon Barkley, right? In the third round, I mean, you can grab, we talked about Jeremiah Love. You can grab Kenneth Walker, maybe a Derrick Henry. Who else is there? We talked Kyren Williams, right? So I kind of prefer to, invest in that second round with a running back there and flip it, because you're right, there's a little bit of a gap in receiver. So investing in those early receivers is good. You're just taking on a little bit of risk if you go full 0 RB on that one. He could get burned like last year. Cruise and Shaker says, hey Tara, is there a sleeper pick you would be willing to take early in drafts? If so, can you name one that is worth taking a round or 2 later? Yes, I can. I would say that one of my favorite so how sleeper are we? Okay, let's do like mid-round sleeper, right? I'm gonna look at wide receiver, mid to late-ish round. Quentin Johnston is one that I feel super, super positive about. I would take him easily a round earlier or 2, round 1 or 2 earlier to make sure that I get him. But dipping back even further, someone that I've talked about the fact that I like Emeka Ibuka a lot, but depending on how training camp goes, I think I'm going to be early drafting a pretty decent amount of Ted Hurst. That's one that I just had I'm in the middle of a dynasty rookie draft, and I just drafted Ted Hurst to my dynasty team. But that's one that I'm probably going to be reaching on a little bit, like right now, that I can say I would feel super comfortable with in terms of a later round draft pick that I would reach on for sure to make sure that I'm grabbing. Ted Hurst is that one because it's tracking for him to for sure be a starter, right? In terms of alignment, we're looking at Emeka Ibuka and Ted Hurst being the starter. And then it seems like Chris Godwin has the inside track as well over Jalen McMillan. But again, I've talked about this previously. Chris Godwin hasn't, played a full season in a while. He's 30. I think he might have hit that wall. So it's entirely possible that by mid-season, what we see is Emeka, Ted Hurst, and Jalen McMillan. But Hurst is the later round one that I'm very interested in making sure that I get on my team because I could realistically see. And while I love Emeka Ibuka, something could always go sideways, right? So there's a reality in which you are drafting. Where is Ted Hurst going right now? Ted Hurst is now. Granted, that's not reliable. He's super late, but unfortunately, that's probably people not updating their rookie rankings that much or not really being tapped in that much. So the ranking is pushed way, way further down than what it is. But his value is still going to stay extremely, extremely low. So that's one that I would be making sure that I'm keeping my eye on to get at the end of fantasy drafts for sure. Don't get sniped. Take it early. Gilliam says, would you trade Justin Jefferson for Jeremiah Love? Ooh. Straight up, I don't know if I would do it straight up. I don't think I would. Because Jefferson's still so young, and I know we're in like a weird quarterback situation, and so I get it. And the value of Jeremiah Love as well, especially if they get a new quarterback next year. But I don't know if I could give up on Jefferson for that. I don't, especially when the only value really in terms of a high upside player in this year's draft is kind of, Jeremiah Love. So I don't know if I'd do it. I don't think I could bring myself to do it, unfortunately. Hi to Steel Bill in the chat. Donald Gillespie says, hey, Tara, spoke with you about Dearman's Fantasy League. Oh, really don't need a commish. The Podfather can kick in the trophy. You know what? I'm still thinking about it. Give me July, and I'll come to a conclusion on that, I promise. And then Turd Ferguson says, how far? My contacts are bad, dude. Turd Ferguson, if it looks like I'm staring at I don't see well. I wear contacts. And by the end of the day, if it looks like I'm just kind of squinting at my computer, it's because the contacts have gone bad throughout the day, their dailies. How far do you think Hampton will fall in casual drafts? I've seen him go 4-3 in pro drafts. But guys I play with are far from pro. I got Hampton in round 11 last year. He won't fall that far. Because I do, especially in more casual leagues, I don't think that they will have any fear of there being, Keaton Mitchell coming on, taking some workload or something. Or towards the end of last year, we did see obviously a lot of Kamani Vidal even after Hampton came back. But I don't think that Hampton is going to fall much further than, let me see. I mean, if he makes it to the third round, that might be a miracle. I think a third round. I think third round in casual drafts is about as far as it'll drop, right? I could see maybe in casual drafts, people get excited over Jeremiah Love and maybe, leap him up and try to take him. But for the most part, or Kenneth Walker is there too. So yeah, I could see in a casual draft him falling to the third round. Once we get in season, I mean, honestly, he's probably going to be for sure a second round pick. Because I think for the most part, people are there already in terms of that being the ideal location, a low end round 2 pick. So maybe in casual leagues, we might be able to get him in round 3, but depending on where you're picking, Making it to the end of round 3, probably not. So in order to get him, you might have to make that late round 2, early round 3 at the latest investment there, depending on where you're drafting there. He's not going to fall. He is being hyped up. We've got Mike McDaniel there, healthy offensive line. He is being pushed forward. He is 100% going to be a top 10 back in terms of fantasy drafts. I don't see it changing. And that's dropped a little bit. Like the ranking earlier in the year he was like RB8. It was pretty aggressive, right? But it's come down a little bit. Thank God for that. And then, thank you. And Donald Gillespie says, I'm going to spend the football year with you either way. Thanks for your work. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's talk about Kyle Pitts, guys. Career year ahead for him, potentially here with the big contract. Congratulations, Kyle Pitts. It's been a rocky road for you in terms of high expectations, but not the output that everyone wanted there. When we're looking at him, it's funny with Kyle Pitts, because when you look at last season, the overall numbers, you look at it and say, hey, it was an overall tight end 2 season. That's very misleading, right? Because we had the strangest amount of injuries of several of our top tight ends, right? That unfortunately made it so that tight end production was just pushed way down this year. And then the second factor in that is that we know that a lot of his production was boosted by several very specific games, right? And then the third aspect of that was that a lot of that production was really basically tied specifically to Kirk Cousins, which is an argument, which and it's funny, kind of segue there. I have had Trey McBride as my tight end 1 because of, again, the repeated upside that Jacoby Brissett brought to him last year, right? But you can make a good argument for why, and this is not like a weird thing, because I guess Bowers in consensus is in fact tight end 1 right now. Yeah, Bowers is consensus tight end 1 right now, but it's very close between the two. You can make the argument that he is the only one that you should really trust, because again, we saw what Cousins has done. We know what Cousins has done in the past with tight ends. TJ Hawkinson fell off the map completely once Cousins was gone, right? And, age has stuff to do with that as well. But at the end of the day, we saw Cousins go to Atlanta, and obviously a very big boom for Kyle Pitts with him specifically. So him heading over to Vegas and how long he will start at quarterback, we don't know, right? But I would assume that Fernando Mendoza will also be tight end friendly as well. So good situation for Bowers heading into a nice bounce back year here for him. But looking at Kyle Pitts and wondering, well, quarterback change, you're now dealing with the combination of Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix. We don't know for sure who's going to start. I can almost guarantee that the same quarterback will not start all season. I would bet some money on that. We will see both of those quarterbacks start at some point this season, right? And neither one of them, and I guess Tua's been fine in terms of tight ends. But again, we still have the skepticism around Michael Penix, right? And then he also has to deal with the fact that, apples to apples, when he's healthy, right? Drake London is definitely the first target in that offense. But I don't think we can underestimate the value, oddly enough, that Kevin Stefanski brings to the offense. And I'm not surprised that they went ahead and locked him into a contract. I was low-key surprised when they franchise tagged him and didn't work it out before then, but that gave them the opportunity to really spend some time and work on the contract and the extension there. But when we're looking at Kevin Stefanski, his system is very straightforward. It's been repeated year after year after year, and it doesn't really matter who's there, right? Don't look at last year and look at Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland and say, well, he threw to Harold Fannin because, he was the one that was, the best pass catcher on the offense. Nope. Ever since Kevin Stefanski took over in Cleveland, he has consistently been throwing to tight ends at a 30% clip target rate plus, right? So there is volume heading Kyle Pitts' way. 100 targets seems very comfortable for him. It'll just be a matter of whether or not he can dominate in terms of red zone opportunities as well here. But feel good about him, feel good about the commitment that Atlanta has made here, and a nice season for him as well. I did want to talk about one more other topic here. We'll wrap up soon because I do think my voice is giving out a little bit there. Actually, no. We'll talk about two more topics. I had two things that specifically I talked about, or if I put it into the title of the show, I should probably talk about it, right? I do want to talk about the Broncos backfield because I've been a little harsh, right? And I said earlier in the show that I was doing a Fantasy Pro show. Actually, it's on, I think it's up right now. And we were talking about, make or break players. And I was on there talking with Andrew Erickson, and one of his players that he was targeting was RJ Harvey. And I was like, oh, okay, let me hear this argument. I'm very interested to see his perspective on it, because you guys know that I have been very anti-Broncos in terms of saying I don't want a piece of this mess outside of Bo Nix. Like, hey, it's a good situation for Bo Nix, right? He's got all the pass catchers in the world you could ask for. One of the deepest, possibly the deepest wide receiver room in the league, right? So when one goes down, you don't even have to worry. Like, those suckers are stepping up. And then from a running back situation, my fear, again, here with J.K. Dobbins, RJ Harvey, and now Jonah Coleman, is that we were going to be put into a permanent committee, right? Because we know what this offense is with, and by the way, it should also scare you that Sean Payton was openly shopping around for a running back in free agency, FYI. So this was not them. Like, they brought Dobbins back, but they were also looking for another running back. So this was not them bringing Dobbins back because, we need a stable back as RJ Harvey takes over. No, I don't think they want RJ Harvey to be a true lead 3-down back, right? Because he did have his issues last year. He was not efficient whatsoever. And because he played in tandem with J.K. Dobbins, you had a 1-for-1 situation of looking at one running back versus the other running back and seeing apples to apples. J.K. Dobbins was more efficient, unfortunately, than R.J. Harvey. Now, maybe, he puts in the work this offseason, fixes all of his issues, and can, bounce back and look better on the ground. But for the most part, specifically while J.K. Dobbins is healthy, I think we've got a very clear picture of what this is going to look like, right? It's going to look exactly like last year, where Dobbins was handling the early down and short yardage work, and RJ Harvey was handling, a little bit on the ground, right? But mainly receiving work. And it is critical to note that receiving work was in the red zone as well. So it wasn't as if it was kind of a weird situation, right? Because it was like if you look at Seattle, the weird thing about them is that, sorry, I just saw a note from Brian Davis says, what's your underdog name? I'll have to look it up. I don't think it's listed as It's Terror Time, because I definitely signed up for underdog way before I started doing content. So I don't know if I ever changed that or not. So I'll have to look. It could be something very random. But when I'm looking at this Broncos backfield, right? Again, the point, like, so Seattle was very interesting in the fact that they iced Kenneth Walker out once they got into the red zone. Like, that sucker came off the field. Denver did something very different, where RJ Harvey was actually a very strong focal point in the red zone. Sean Payton trusted him, right? Especially because he wanted to use him as a pass catcher there. So he was getting receiving touchdowns that were not the result of him breaking off a long run or something. That was, intentional red zone work, right? Very close in the red zone, right? So it was very interesting from that perspective, because there was the split usage in terms of, he may not have been getting like goal line short yardage touches, but he was getting red zone touchdowns, which was very interesting, right? So it does make him a viable fantasy asset. So it was interesting to hear that argument, because I feel like perhaps I am being a little bit too harsh on RJ Harvey, right? Just because I did draft him last year, and the experience was a little bit maddening. Because again, we would get a very, bulk of the workload on the ground with Dobbins. He would, get a touchdown. But unfortunately, because I had some comments as well asking, why not targeting J.K. Dobbins? And the problem with targeting J.K. Dobbins is that his production is guaranteed to be rather mediocre, right? His ceiling and his floor are kind of in the same range, unfortunately, to the point where his ceiling can't go above a certain point, because he does not have any receiving upside, and that's not going to change. At no point. Now, granted, I guess because even if RJ Harvey were to go down with an injury, theoretically, Jaleel McLaughlin would come in there and do the receiving work. I just don't see a scenario where they would start sending those passes that they gave to RJ Harvey J.K. Dobbins' way, just because he has not been utilized in that way whatsoever. That's not his specialty. So what you're looking at is like, hey, best case scenario for Dobbins on a weekly basis is he makes it to 80 yards and he gets a touchdown, right? And there's maybe a reception, maybe a single reception. He will not get above that on a given week, right? So you're realistically looking at a ceiling of like 14 fantasy points, unfortunately, with him. And having that lack of upside when I can, in that same range, draft a bunch of guys that I talked about previously in terms of those committee backs who have the far higher upside, because if their running back in their backfield went down, they would not be working in tandem with somebody. If Kyren Williams goes down, Blake Corum does not work in tandem with somebody, he would immediately have top 5 upside. We've seen if DeAndre Swift gets injured, Kyle Monangai will have an excellent week, right? So I can't advise investing in J.K. Dobbins when all the guys being drafted around him can realistically get into a situation where they're putting up stupid numbers. So that's my only issue, where I automatically am Xing J.K. Dobbins out of the picture. But perhaps I have been too harsh on R.J. Harvey, because my fear has been that, okay, J.K. Dobbins goes down with his injury, as he always does. Well, Jonah Coleman just comes in and immediately fills that role, because that, physically and capability-wise can be a one-for-one replacement. But that's not a guarantee, right? So how much can I knock RJ Harvey on the potential of a new rookie running back maybe coming in and taking all of J.K. Dobbins' work if J.K. Dobbins were to go down? It could be a very even split where Harvey would benefit with some increased workload on the ground and the same receptions that Coleman would not be taking from him, because that's not his specialty. So perhaps, especially with his ranking right now, because Harvey was overdrafted last year, unfortunately. And now he is, where are you at? My rankings are all effed up. RJ Harvey is at RB 32 right now in consensus rankings, right? I guess at that point, right, it's okay to say, all right, because he has the receiving upside, I could make that investment. So he's not my favorite, but it is within the possibilities that Coleman, the reaction of Coleman being drafted might be an overreaction. Now, granted, the rumors are saying that Coleman could actually see work early on, right? And perhaps this gets back to more of the Sean Payton backfield that we saw when Javonte Williams was there, when we had those frustrating, week after week of, it was like, oh, it was Javonte, but it was also, Jaleel McLaughlin, and it was also this, and it was all like, he was rolling out just all kinds of random players on a given week. So again, it's a worrisome situation for me, but I can see the argument where at RB 32, it's not exactly a high risk situation. That his upside is receiving, so you have that benefit in full PPR. So perhaps I've been a little too harsh. I can't say that I do or envision myself in any way, shape, or form drafting a ton of RJ Harvey, because again, he goes in that range. Actually, he goes right in that range where I like, again, I talked about Kyle Monangai, Blake Corum, Kenneth Gainwell, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, right? But perhaps I'm being a little too harsh on a forever fade there, because at least the ADP has dropped to a more reasonable point there, right? Andrew Coleman says, would you be concerned drafting Jacobs in the early third? No, just because we haven't heard, there have been no formal charges. We don't really know any details. So, it always puts it at risk, right? But I do kind of like, and I hate to liken it to anything, but we have seen before, right, where players will get, I guess Rashee Rice is one, right? I think Alvin Kamara is one too, but we'll see where players get into these legal issues and it doesn't affect them in the year that we're drafting them in because of the fact that it's something that can be, pushed back, delayed, continued, whatnot. So I'm not at this point because there's no major red flag, right, in terms of like any actual court dates or anything fading him or pushing him back. So I'm not concerned about drafting him in the early third. I think that's very good value for him, to be honest. Maybe I'm pushing it like a little bit back, but even then, so I think that's very good value. And I do expect a bounce back season for him. If apples to apples, if there were no legal issues, I did have him ranked a lot higher. I didn't drop him back per se, but I'm not going to lie, I did have him ranked a lot higher before, just because when I'm looking at, I'm going to pull up his stats real quick here. So last year, because he was playing through an injury, the numbers look a little funky because I've gotten comments before and saying that there was a clear drop off in terms of effectiveness and that he hit a wall and is probably, on a cliff. I don't think that's the case. He's also not at cliff age, right? Because 28 is no longer cliff age. We've gone past that for running backs for the most part, for big prominent running backs and big bodied running backs, right? But looking at his production last year, you do have to consider the fact that he played through multiple games where he shouldn't. So while 15 games, 234 carries would be very concerning for anybody else, he did not make it through the majority of the game in several of those games. So really, in terms of full games that he played, it's a lot lower than that. In the first half of the season, when he was healthy before the injury, I talked about it a little bit earlier. I mean, he was one of the most reliable bets for touchdowns every single week. Let me pull up his game log real quick there. Even with, and he did have some regression last year, right? But even then, weekly finishes in half PPR last season, 14, 18, 23, a couple of those games where I think the Jordan Love injury games were his overall finish, but then he got into a nice flow. I think, let me verify. That was Jordan Love I'm like 99% sure. Let me make sure those were the Jordan Love games that he was injured. No. Where were the Jordan Love games? No. I'm thinking about the year before. Okay. But back to Josh Jacobs there. After that, he got into a very nice flow, finishing as RB2, 4, 7, 19, 4, 9. Then he got injured. So before the injury, he was cooking, putting up top 10 numbers on a weekly basis. I just think that the back half of the season left a little nasty taste in everybody's mouth in terms of feeling like he just, let us down. But ultimately, he was playing through games that he shouldn't have because the Packers were trying to make that playoff push. And so he was out there trying to make it. But there were games where he had like 4 carries, 7 carries, right? 12 carries. He should not have been out on the field. His normal workload is significantly higher than that, right? So knowing that he came down significantly in terms of carries, he will be going into 2026 with fresh legs. I'm not shocked that he dealt with injuries, and this is my concern for Christian McCaffrey. I'm not shocked that Jacobs dealt with injuries last season because he had a very aggressive workload the year before, as did Saquon Barkley. Beware those guys that are coming off of aggressive workloads that are not named Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry can do whatever he wants, but everybody else, when you have 340 plus carries, you're going to come back not so fresh the next year and potentially underperform there. And Christian McCaffrey had over 300 carries for the first time in his career, over 400 touches, the highest of his entire career. Who has over 400 touches? That's like absolutely insane, right? So that's my beware side note on him. But I do like Jacobs for a bounce back there after very limited usage in the back half of the season. Coming back healthy, fresher legs. I think he is definitely about a good bet to outperform his ADP, provided there are no legal issues there for him, for sure. And then let's move on to one more topic before we wrap things up. I want to talk about De'Von Achane here. Got a question, mailbag question. Tua is gone. Malik Willis is a running quarterback. Achane will get checkdowns, and the Miami offense will be terrible. How is he an RB1? I talked about this in a YouTube video. So this is, if you watch my last YouTube video, you are aware of my feelings on this. I have officially decided, I also talked about this in the Fantasy Pro show yesterday. I have officially decided that I am going to be De'Von Achane's savior this year. Whenever anyone, says that he's going to be a bust or talks down on him or doubts him, I'm just going to tell him, get behind me, Achane. I got you, buddy. I'm ready to go to bat for you. And I've lined up my laundry list of reasons to combat all of the negative potential arguments there for De'Von Achane in this Miami offense. Now, first of all, I do want to apologize. If I say the Miami offense is trash, I'm sorry, Miami fans. I mean, maybe you feel that way too. There's hope for the future, right? But objectively, you don't have a wide receiver one. And probably not a wide receiver two. And I like Chris Bell a lot. I just don't realistically see how they put him on the field. I don't. It'll be interesting to see, but I think for his sake and knowing that, and maybe, and obviously I love their new head coach because he is from Green Bay, right? So maybe they exceed expectations, right? I mean, it's possible, but more than likely, with the schedule that they have, it's going to be very tough for them to have a lot of success. I wish them the best, though. But I think we might be overreacting a little bit to, Miami's offense potentially being bad here because it wasn't good last season. We act as if we haven't seen De'Von Achane in a bad offense. They've been bad. Unfortunately, they were not good last season. Really not good. They were 25th in offensive points, 26 in total yards, 24th in rush attempts, but yet they were 13th in rushing yards. And we know that wasn't Tua because Tua doesn't run, right? Where's Tua run? Well, he tries every now and then. The results aren't good. That was Achane, right? And some other running backs as well. But at the end of the day, that was Achane, right? He had over 1,300 yards, had a 5.6 yards per carry. It doesn't matter how bad the offensive line is. It doesn't matter if there is a bad quarterback in there. Achane gets his because he is a special running back. That is why he got that contract, right? It doesn't even require a great offensive line. He has been trucking over the past 2 seasons. I have zero concerns that he can put up numbers if Miami's offense is well below average. Got no concerns for that. Second concern that a lot of people have, right, is the worry that there's not going to be checkdowns because Malik Willis is not a checkdown quarterback in theory, right? Because he's a running back, which obviously, makes things a little bit shaky when you have a running quarterback in terms of providing checkdowns. And then we have zero evidence that he has been able to check down in the past because our sample size is literally, I think, less than you can literally count the number of full games that he has played on one hand. We have the smallest sample size that has ever existed. He looked fully rehabilitated and well-developed in Green Bay, right? But it's not as if we have a plethora of examples. And I went through every single game where he played, more than 50% of snaps, and the man doesn't check down. He doesn't. Now, granted, when he was in Tennessee, he would have been checking down to Derrick Henry, which teams don't do, right? So that doesn't really count. And Green Bay is not a check down heavy offense. You'll see games every now and then where Jacobs has a high level of targets, but for the most part, you're not getting just a ridiculous amount of check downs to him. But the one thing that I want to say, guys, is that you got to remember that some running backs that are receiving aren't doing it via checkdowns, right? And that's De'Von Achane. Achane lines up as a receiver. He lines up as a receiver in the way that Christian McCaffrey does, in the way that Bijan Robinson does. Last year, Achane lined up in the slot over 100 times. He lined up on the outside 42 times. For comparison for you guys, CMC lined up in the slot 93 times. So 93 times in the excessive usage that CMC had last year, and lined up in the slot 93 times and on the outside 21 times. So already in that excessive usage year, we already had last year Achane lining up as a receiver more often than Christian McCaffrey. He lined up as a receiver. Is it more often? Yeah, let me do that math real quick. About the same amount as Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson played on the outside a little bit more. He played on the outside in 59 snaps, in the slot 98 snaps. When you have a gifted pass catcher, you're not relying on checkdowns. They're going to line him up as a receiver, and we don't have to question what they're going to do offensively because they kept their pass game coordinator, Bobby Slowick, on roster and promoted him to offensive coordinator. And for reference there, because again, I saw, concerns. I had a nice conversation with someone who, was concerned, hey, You're not worried about the loss of Mike McDaniel. You should be discounting the offense because Mike McDaniel is gone. I actually really believe in Bobby Slowick, right? And I'm really excited to see Bobby Slowick in this offense because he got a raw deal in Houston. That was messed up. Bobby Slowick had a fantastic first year as an offensive coordinator in Houston, to the point where people were like saying, oh, this could be one of the next, big offensive coordinator, head coaching candidates, right? And then he had that awful second year that now, as time has gone on, we've come to realize, oh, whoops, that was CJ Stroud. That was not Bobby Slowick's issue. That was CJ Stroud. So I actually think that Bobby Slowick is a very interesting coordinator because we know that he is talented, has upside, has a good scheme, and more importantly, Bobby Slowick has spent years within San Francisco in tandem with Mike McDaniel. So we'd see the connection there. So realistically, we're not going to see a big shift in terms of offensive vision, right? They're not going to change how they use Achane. We're not all of a sudden going to see them not utilize him as a receiving option. There will be actual plays where he is a receiver. And so that's a very different story than saying that we're relying on Achane to have checkdowns from Malik Willis. So, realistically, he can be the first look in terms of receiving option as well, especially because you got to remember as well, they have the ability to line him up outside because they are deep at running back, right? So they can have somebody in the backfield like Jalen Wright or Ollie Gordon and have Achane lined up in the slot, right? So it's very interesting, the level of flexibility that they have there. So I'm very excited to see. I'm not worried about Achane. I get why people are in terms of being concerned, right? Because there's a lot of mystery with this new look Miami offense. These are all new faces with the exception of Achane. But that's the staple. That's the man they paid. That is the man that they want to lead the way here. And we have already seen concerns that the Miami receivers it's not clicking, right? Unfortunately. Perhaps someone steps up and separates themselves, but at the end of the day, it's looking a little sketchy, right? It's looking a little sketchy. The legend says just because Achane lines up in the slot doesn't mean he's going to cook their best cornerback. Defenses will see it coming. Well, yeah, they already have though. That's the point, is that it already happened. So we're not guessing that he's going to line up in the slot. That's how they've been doing it, and he's been successful with it. So, yeah, I mean, they can decide to say, hey, we're only going to stop Achane, but probably, I mean, scheme-wise, double covering someone out of the slot there, probably not going to see that happen, especially because, again, this offense is, in terms of the way that it operates, not going to be that different from last year. The only difference there is that there's no Jalen Waddle, but those receivers still have to be covered. So, but yeah, so that's it, for sure. It doesn't mean that he's going to cook their best corners, but he was very successful doing it last year. So I don't see why he wouldn't this year as well. Loving Life says, I hope guys on my league pass on Achane. I'll take him every time. And that's what I'm hoping too, right? Is that I have him ranked high, but what I'm hoping is that we see a little bit of a shift towards him being able to go in the second round, early second round there. So I would love to, right? Can imagine you sit there, focus on, they could double cover him, legend. They could theoretically. But again, they could double cover tongue twister there. They could double cover anyone. Talented people, they work through it. It is what it is. But I'm hoping that we can end up seeing him drop a little bit, especially as people become a little bit more comfortable with some of these wide receivers. Some of the wide receivers have been pushed back a little bit in ADP, so I'd like to see guys like Drake London pushed up and Achane pushed back. So hopefully we can maybe get Achane pushed into the mid-second round range, because then you could start to round off with a very reliable wide receiver one, and then turn around and get Achane as your RB1 in the second round. That would be the ideal situation, right? Let's see here. Anything else? Linda Wells says, I play in a 10-man standard format fantasy league if I get the number 1 pick, who should I draft? I would still advocate for Bijan. I don't know if you have any bonuses there in terms of first downs, whatnot, fantasy points for first downs or anything, but I think I would still advocate for Bijan as the first overall pick there. For sure. In PPR, I'm torn. I go back and forth in terms of first overall pick there. But in standard, I would lean towards Bijan on that one. Don't have a lot of fear around Kevin Stefanski. As much as I talk about Kevin Stefanski, oddly enough, I don't mind him for running backs. He is a fine coach for running backs. He has no problem with, 3-down work. And honestly, we should see a boost in production, really, because last year we had the odd Brian Robinson being pulled out. Brian Robinson is there now. Tyler Algier being put in at the goal line while Robinson was pulled out. So apples to apples, we could see like an increase in goal line looks, oddly enough, for Bijan because of the change in coaching staff and not having that weird concept of we got to, get other people in at the goal line there. So could be even higher upside there. So Bijan is the way we go here. But that wraps things up, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me. As a note, I am traveling next week. So we'll either not have a Wednesday show or I might push it to Tuesday. We'll see. It'll be one of those two, but I will let you guys know via a post on my YouTube channel if there will be a show and if it's switched or not. So, but outside of that, other than next week, because I can't do the show on Wednesday at 8 p.m., but outside of that, any week, I am live with you every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, taking your questions live. And as we get we're inching closer to training camp. We're a few weeks away here. We're going to have a lot more. And I see, more best ball drafts and stuff and people more interested in picking up on that. I think once we get into July, people really try to lock in. So we'll ramp things up here. I have my Scott Fish Bowl draft this Saturday. So I'll be telling you guys about that. I'm very excited. So when, next live show, I'll talk about it, but very excited because we've got the new scoring settings. I think I've got a strategy. I see Bob Harris in the chat. I peeped. I don't think anyone that's in I'm in Houston, so it's a Houston live draft. I don't think anyone that I'm drafting with is watching right now, to my knowledge. But just in case, I'm not going to show you the exact strategy here. But I've got a very specific strategy, and I'll be coming back with it after the draft to see how effective it was in usage. It's different than what I've done before. I've been very, very strict about my strategy in Scott Fish Bowls, and it's worked, right? Year after year, I've been very strict about it, but I'm switching it up this year because of the bonus scoring. So I'm nervous, but I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. So I'll tell you guys how that goes. And if there's anyone in Houston, y'all can always stop by as well. DM me if you don't know where it is going to be. But it'll be fun because there will be multiple live drafts going on. It's like a Karbach brewery company. Yeah. But there will be multiple live drafts going on, lots of people there. So it's fun if you want to stop by. But other than that, I will talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining in. Fantastic chat. Lots of good questions. Talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful week.
It's important to me that all of our media be free, but it is you, the premium subscriber, with access to data analysis, the rankings, Dynasty Deluxe, DFS Dominator, the world-famous draft kit. You get that content and you make all of this possible. The free podcasts, articles, NFL draft content. So I must give a special thanks to all of our premium subscribers. You make all of this possible.